Hi there, everybody, and welcome to nGendr Live. It's good to have you all here. So, sorry we've been away for a little bit, but real life got in the way a little bit. There was a few things that happened. You might have seen some of them in the news, but we're back anyway. And yeah, I think you can probably imagine what we're going to be talking about, I guess. But anyway, who have we got on the show today? So obviously we've got me, Natalie, but we've also got Lisa.
Hello.
We've got Charlotte.
Hey.
And we've got Rachel as well.
Hello, good evening.
So, as I said, yeah, we've not been on for a while. A couple of things got in the way. We were due to have an nGendr Live 2 weeks ago on November the 9th, but of course, world events rather got in the way that day. You know, I suppose there's been a lot of quite negative stuff around in the news. So, whilst clearly we're going to talk about that, you know, the big things that are going on, as you've probably seen if you've been following our Twitter account, we want to talk about Trump, Brexit, fascism, the Daily Mail having a pop at trans people. We want to talk about all of that, but we know that's quite negative. We know that can be quite depressing. So if anyone's got any great topics they want us to talk about, any questions they want to ask us, any things they want to see us chat about, please let us know in the YouTube chat. It is available as usual. If you look on the right-hand side on the YouTube, you can see that a few people have already started to say nice things about my eyebrows, which is always nice. And so, yeah, just weigh in there, and we'll try and talk about it. But without further ado, let's move on to our first topic, which, as I've hinted at already, is the minor news that's come out of the US about the basically onset of a rather nasty oppressive regime over there, which, you know, I think we should be conscious that we are all in the UK, so clearly we are not as directly affected as some of our American friends would be. So if you're in America, we definitely want to hear from you. We want to be conscious of the fact that it's easy probably for us to kind of, from our British perspective, joke about these things, but obviously it's very real to you know, to people who are experiencing some, you know, nasty situations over at the moment. So, you know, let's be conscious of that. But yeah, who wants to kick us off? Who's got a few thoughts on that? Lisa, are you going to shift in there? I can see you.
So it's the negativity, isn't it? He attacked every minority going. He used every dirty tactic, every lie, every nasty, horrible trick in the book to turn people against each other. And I think trans people are just going to get caught in the crossfire. And it's really scary. It really is. I mean, I think he's going to back down, and now he's safely ensconced in the White House. Things will mellow, but he's left such a dangerous undercurrent, much the same as Brexit did here and fascism did here, or is doing here, and it's going to be dangerous, and it's scary.
Yeah, so actually, I guess one thing we should have done is, just in case anyone has missed what we're talking about, I guess, we should be clear that or indeed who hasn't followed the news in as much detail, is that, you know, obviously Trump's been elected in the US, goes into you know, presidential position on the 19th of January, I think, and ran on a ticket that was the Republican ticket, which was quite intensely discriminatory to pretty much anyone who isn't a white cis-het male. That's probably fair to say, isn't it? And so, you know, there's a likelihood that we could see laws being enacted to prevent people, trans people, from being able to, you know, go to the toilet, you know, being able to get ID in the correct gender, you know, change their name, all that kind of stuff, as well as obviously the intentionally racist rhetoric that was coming out of that campaign. Being able to get ID in the correct gender. So So yeah, trans people are detransitioning, aren't they, to avoid this fallout? So yeah, not a great situation. I mean, right, Rachel,
like,
Charlotte, or at least actually,
there's been something like 55 laws enacted in the States in the past year or two regarding bathroom access for trans people. And I just wonder if it's like an enormous diversionary tactic if it's been used here as well, if to pick on little issues that don't really matter, but that get the media focused and distracted from the real problem. And I just wonder if the Trump campaign has been actually quite brilliant at distracting the electorate from how bad he is.
There is an awful lot of distraction tactics. I mean, the biggest one recently was the reaction to the cast of Hamilton. They were not rude to Mike Pence at all. They just made a plea and said thank you a couple of times, actually. And then that was the news story. And interestingly, there was a court settlement at the same time where I think Trump was accused of defrauding people out of savings to the tune of $62 million and then settled for $25 million. And this kind of goes as a bit of a quiet understory after some people might have been mean to Mike Pence and they weren't. So there's an awful lot of diversion tactics, and it's just one of many.
yeah, I think this is the really recurring theme that we've seen from, and we talked about Brexit earlier, the US election. It's just this bizarre focus on stuff that isn't relevant as complete distraction from the real substance and the real issues and so on. And that Hamilton one's a great example. This bizarre narrative that there's this great disservice has been done to Mike Pence. And if you watch the video of what they actually said, like you say, it's just, hi, thanks for coming to the show, please look after this diverse America kind of thing. And I wonder if a lot of it is the way people consume news and media these days. And they'll just read the odd tweet and no one actually understands what actually happened. They just read the person that they follow's take on what happened.
It's how all these fake news items get into circulation. Somebody just posts some nonsense, retweets it, retweets again, and then suddenly you've got a news item that's just complete and utter nonsense and fabrication. But an interesting point to bring up now about Trump, and he's making comments about Hamilton and, oh, it's so rude. He's on his Twitter doing this. But then when it comes to situations like this movement and mobilization of the so-called alt-right, as they call it, which is basically neo-Nazism, surprisingly silent. Or anything, what was it, there was that letter that was sent, it was a Dear Terrorist Bleep. We're now writing to you to give you the opportunity to remove your headscarf or leave this country. The neighborhood watch in the name of Trump. Does he say anything like, actually, I deplore you using my name in vain in these situations? No, he says nothing.
Of course. There's an interesting mixture between sort of openly divisive policies and so on that are held up by by Trump, by the politicians, as actually a sort of public, visible part of their own platform, against immigrants and all the usual suspects, to be honest. Anything, of course, to divide people and other them and blame shift. So a split between that and the otherness and the hate that it encourages, and therefore other people propagate on the hate for them. As you say, there was, I think I saw the same thing about this. Some people have received letters saying, you must remove your headscarf, starting with things like, now that America has been made great again, which is a wonderful use of doublespeak right there. And yes, to a large extent, once the atmosphere has been fostered that this kind of hate is okay, it's okay to other people and to be so divisive, then the worst tendencies in those that are perceiving themselves currently to be in the favoured group, although of course whether that will stay favoured is very much questionable. But those that perceive themselves to be favoured will then pick up the ball and run with it and do the rest of the hating for you.
Yeah, I think that's yeah, good point. And I think, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? This whole idea that, you know, as you say, he's not condemning any of this stuff, but a lot of it is he's managing to find this kind of slight distance from some of it, and a lot of it, it's like you say, it's stuff being done in his name, but he's not telling people to go out there and, you know, abuse minorities, but that's the message they're getting.
Yeah,
and it's almost like plausible denial thing, isn't it?
Because you can barely, or can't, or chooses not to string a coherent sentence together. The whole thing about during the campaign some weeks ago about the Second Amendment, if I remember correctly. You know, maybe the NRA could go and sort out that problem.
Yeah.
Very vague words like that, just getting the idea out
The
there.
Second Amendment people, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Second Amendment. What? Yeah.
So he doesn't have to spell it out, and you know, whether he's doing it deliberately or not, or whether he is just accidentally a dangerous idiot, I don't know.
Well, it's actually, isn't it? It's the power of saying nothing, because what he's allowing, and you know, this is actually kind of it's the exact same thing. I mean, how much of this I wonder is people like Nigel Farage influences. Exactly the same thing that the Leave campaign did in our referendum here, whereas they didn't really say anything. They just allowed people to project their idea of what they wanted the campaign to be about on them and didn't deny it. And because there was almost an absence of, you know, well, there wasn't almost, there was an absence of policy. There was an absence of policy, an absence of fact, a complete black hole of actual ideology that actually allowed, you know, the electorate to just say, yeah, I think Trump's, you know, he's going to make America great again, but he's also for the gays, but he's also for, you know, this and that, and they didn't say any of that stuff. They just can project their prejudices on him and imagine that he said that, but he's not really said anything. And
you get these very nebulous concepts out there, like take back control and make America great again, and everybody that latches onto those things then extends that to include whatever means they deem necessary to be able to achieve that nebulous thing, whatever it means to them.
And because they're not saying anything, it's very difficult to refute something that somebody isn't really even saying. I fear this is the modern climate of politics, unfortunately. It's been going this way for some time, and I think we're probably reaching peak nothingness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We said we'd try not to be too depressing.
Well,
so
the thing that I would add to that, to try and add a note of positivity, I suppose. So, although this may not come out as positive when I start speaking, I'm glad that I'm not in America. It's now firmly on my list of places not to go, if it wasn't already. And I really feel for the people that are there, because it must be just terrifying. So I suppose the best spin I can put on that is now is a really great time to make those friends, build up that network, and do whatever you can to help each other, even if it's just a daily check-in on each other and how you're doing, and you know, you're still okay, anything I can do to help.
Do you remember that more than half the people voted for Hillary?
Yep.
I could maybe put a slight positive slant on. So it's a Republican government, Republican House, Republican Senate. Not good news, but they're all about small government, which is bad news for some people, but could actually be good news for others. So the good thing about the Democrats was that federal law could step in, like these bathroom bills, and kids at school can't use the changing room of their of the appropriate gender. In comes federal law and says, no, you can't do that. They can do that. Now that's not going to be the case. But while there's going to be a lot of states passing very negative legislation that's very anti-trans, very anti-gay, very discriminatory, these so-called religious freedom bills, there are states in America that won't be passing these. California's a very pro-equality state. I think New York is as well. There's quite a few that would have who voted Democrats in the election. The fact that they will have local control, and if they've got democratic governors and representatives, they themselves can put through good legislation that doesn't get interference from federal government. So
I guess the danger, isn't it, is that whether is what the Democrats do now. Do they? How do they react? The danger is, do they go the way, for example, the Labour Party has done in the UK and decide that, oh, okay, the rhetoric is, the public rhetoric is getting more racist, is getting more isolationist. We have to go in that direction to try and grab some of the vote back. Do they abandon what is right about diversity and equality and so on in order to try and grab some of the vote back, which would be wrong, but they could go down that route.
Discussing something like this today, actually. I was at this session about kind of cultural differences and attitudes regarding sexual orientation and gender identity, and it's kind of striking that balance. Is how much do politicians lead public opinion, and how much politicians are led by public opinion? So I think one example that we discussed today was the repeal of Section 28. And for those that don't know, Section 28 was almost like an anti-propaganda law that they have in Russia. So it was basically local governments had control. So it's giving control to councils, but within that legislation was not to promote any non-traditional family values, particularly in schools. So that was repealed in England and Wales in 2003 and in Scotland in 2001. However, that was passed through governments in Scotland very easily, 99 to 18 votes. However, public opinion at the time, well, was one survey or one poll that actually said about 86% were not in favour of repealing it, although the source is very dubious. So in that situation, it's politicians leading public opinion. So Natalie, to take you to the Labour Party point, really they need to galvanise and bring public opinion back to a more egalitarian viewpoint, and not just pander to the current, well, right-wing rhetoric.
I think that's a really good point, actually, is, now is a time for politicians to lead and to say, actually, to really sell a vision of what society should and could be. And this is where the left has got things got quite wrong for quite a while, and say, look, actually, we can be, it's not a zero-sum game. We can build a better, more equal and more just society whilst protecting the economic security of everybody at the same time. It's not a case of, well, if you look after minorities, then poor white people are going to suffer. It shouldn't ever have to be like that way. The only reason that people have been made to feel like that is because economic elites have managed to make the social or the media narrative sound like that, but that's not true. So there is an opportunity for somebody to make that case convincingly and really bring people with them. But it's just a question of whether someone is A, capable and willing to do that, and B, allowed to do that, given the power of the right-wing media.
They need to sell. What they need to do is they need to sell an idea of this is what we are. Because at the moment, this is where the Democrats failed in America. This is where Remain failed here. This is where Labour's failing at the moment. Is they keep saying we're not them. Oh, Remain's better because we're not Leave, or the Democrats are better because we're not Trump. And it was all about. I mean, if you look at the statistics in the latest election, they had a lower turnout. So Trump got no more votes than any other Republican candidate before. It's just Hillary Clinton got so much fewer votes than Obama did in either of his
I thought she got more in the end.
She got a higher popular vote, but if you look at the proportions, it was a lot farther down, whereas Republicans.
Oh, in the swing states, yeah. I mean, it's one of those bizarre situations, isn't it? That basically the election is decided by 4 states, and the rest of them are irrelevant because they always vote the same way. I guess it's like the UK, though. All of our elections are decided by a few constituencies, which sometimes change.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with electoral system. So we should have a look. The chat's been pretty busy today, so thank you everybody for inputting on that. And there's a few interesting points on there actually. So Ashley, who joined us last time, is actually saying, yeah, that Trump's voters are now getting upset that he's backtracking on stuff. So twas ever thus, I guess.
What he
This is
said,
modern
what he
politics.
said he was going to do, you can't do. It's just not possible. It's just nonsense.
What I do hope
When there's also
about
like,
on is the Affordable Care Act. I mean, that's what a lot of trans people are worried about in the States is hormones and surgery. And
I'm kind of hoping that the Americans' love of their constitution is going to be their saving grace for the for the Democrat side, and because a lot of these changes that seem to be proposed do seem to be unconstitutional. So,
yeah,
as far as I very vaguely understand these things, so if there are discriminatory things which are being proposed, and of course a lot of them are, then I'm kind of hoping that the courts would rule that the Constitution doesn't allow that. And
4 years. 4 years.
Yeah.
So what else have we got anyway? We've got like the 1930s all over again, divide and conquer. Yeah. We've got seeing these political results as symptoms of global issues, and that's a good point. Insofar as we are seeing this stuff happening in lots of countries. We're now seeing in France there's a very real danger that Marine Le Pen could win the election there. I wonder to what extent these things are snowballing. And this is interesting as well, insofar as what Charlotte touched upon earlier about the cultural differences between certain countries. So it's interesting how almost Germany almost stands alone as the kind of remaining liberal power on the world stage, and it's almost as if they've got recent experience of why not doing that is a really bad idea.
Yeah,
and
member stuff. Who knew?
Yeah. So is what do you think? America's got quite a short history, and they probably don't have experience of electorally really messing things up before, and maybe they need to do that once. Probably a terrible way of looking at it, but maybe they need to do that once to realise this isn't really good. I mean, they've got some other stuff wrong, Let's not overlook that. Obviously, we've got a long, proud history of doing things in an awful fashion, but
maybe they can operate in a sandbox and contain their mistakes for themselves. But then again,
they need a
right?
test environment that they could have they could vote for Trump in a test environment, and they could see what happens, and then they just don't productionize it.
You can roll back now.
Roll back in.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, non-IT people.
Stepping away from the IT people. Right.
So, right, do we have any more on that? Anything more we want to talk about Trump, Brexit?
There's something in the chat there about yes. I hope that Obama will pardon Chelsea Manning. Yes, here. As I believe that's within his power to do so before he's no longer president, or January the 20th or whatever it is. So another 2 months or so. Hopefully that will happen. Yeah.
I've always been fascinated by this fantastic period between the election and then the swearing in of the new president. Because if you're a second-term president who's lost their, you can't. I just go crazy. You could do all this silly. You could just.
Well, they call it the lame duck period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you're a lame duck.
Because
you're holding a position, you can't do anything.
But there's loads of stuff you can do. So someone made a really good point. For example, the Supreme Court judge appointments. Typically, the Supreme Court appointments, they're supposed to go to Congress and get them approved. But if they can't agree, the president can just say, do you know what, sod the lot of you, I'm just installing them. And so, like, there's loads of stuff in American law that allows that kind of stuff to happen. So Obama could just go, do you know what, I'm going to appoint myself as a Supreme Court judge or something. I don't know exactly who do him. I don't know if they have to have certain qualifications, but you can just get this position where you've got like no consequences, but you can just make whatever decision you like. And I'd go crazy.
Qualifications. I think events have proved that that's not really true. Anyway.
Well, yeah. Well, didn't Mike Pence the other day appointed a local judge in Indiana who did a law degree 16 years ago and has never worked in law, and he just appointed her as a judge, and not the mayor of the town, who presumably is also a Republican because it's Indiana, was like, I'm not sure about this, mate, to be honest. You've just basically appointed some like woman from down the road as our judge, and she doesn't really know what he's doing. But Mike Pence going to Mike Pence, I guess.
You have correctly summed up current affairs.
So someone makes an excellent point. Do you think there are safeguards in place in the event the commander-in-chief gets drunk on power and starts running riots?
Well, that's looking on the bright side.
Yeah, I mean, I guess historically,
I would hope there are checks and balances.
Cuba has taken the place of that check.
Convenient, I think, but yeah, see how that goes.
Yeah, I don't know. It's slightly alarming. I mean, I guess they've got to do that. I've seen the films. Yeah, like Donald Trump said, I watch the shows, so I've seen the films about how like nuclear wars get started, and you've got to have two people and they've got to turn keys at the same time. So that other person, just don't turn the key.
Yeah, that's not how it happens.
nGendr
Don't say that.
politics.
Don't say that.
Move on.
I mean, I would imagine if they did something really apocalyptically silly, that somebody else might go, do you know what? I'm not doing this. I mean,
I'd like to think,
I don't think any one person has that much power. I think it definitely has to be agreed upon by. I think when it comes to war decisions, the Joint Chiefs have to. The president gets final say, but I think there'd be strong advice not to engage in nuclear war.
There will be safeguards, I'm sure. And the Cold War has loads of examples, as we were going to say before, of individual acts potentially preventing global catastrophe, like all the sort of Baltic war games examples where you've got, someone was presiding over the radar equipment and they see a load of stuff coming in and they're like, oh my God, what's going on here? And they think this must be some sort of anomalous event. I'm going to ignore it. And they ignore it and it turns out to be an anomalous event. But had they reported it, people might have launched stuff. So there's loads of stuff. Look them up. There's loads of things like that.
Wow. People love a story of an individual saving the world. It's probably a bit less clear cut than that.
I mean, it's probably slightly Hollywoodized, but
yeah. Like turning keys to set off nuclear weapons or red.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true. Have you seen GoldenEye?
A long time ago.
I think these things generally it comes down to some like Russian guys in like a building with a radar dome on the top, and that's anyway.
Yeah.
So where do we go from that now? We think we can probably move on to the next topic. I think we've kind of drifted a little bit off topic there. So the other main thing we wanted to talk about, again, more cheerful stuff, more fruits of fascism, I guess. We wanted to talk about the Daily Mail and their recent treatment of transgender people, in particular trans kids in the UK, and how they've kind of decided to go for us a bit. And what do we want to say about that? I mean, well, I should say actually first, so that for anyone who hasn't seen it or needs a bit more detail, about 2 weeks ago, I think it was a week, 2.5 weeks ago, I think it was the weekend before the US elections, the Daily Mail decided, we suspect an editorial decision because it was an absolutely obvious narrative to it. Printed a few stories, which are basically attack pieces on the general concept of transgender kids, but in particular the charity Mermaids, which supports transgender children and their families. And just attacking from all angles, attacking the charity themselves and the running of it, attacking the concept that children could recognise that they are trans and being allowed to transition. The usual awful scare stories about what transition for a trans child means. And it's fairly nasty stuff. So yeah, I mean, who wants to go first?
I'll do one thing out of the way to start with, which is so one of the things you haven't mentioned actually is the so one of these stories which was in this relatively concerted arrangement of several stories over 2 or 3 days, and as well as attacking mermaids, I believe one of them was attacking this series on the BBC website, Just a Girl, about a fictional trans girl and her struggles or concerns about being accepted at her new school and so forth. I should have spelled it out at this point. I have to be a little bit careful what I say because just in case people don't know, I work with the BBC and nothing to do with that programme, but yeah, they are my employer, so I have to be a little bit careful. However, having said that, I started watching some of the programme and I thought it was very good. It was a very useful resource, and it seems to be the usual Daily Mail and other sort of turf-influenced activity of reacting against a thing which they probably haven't even watched. I think often they profess to not having watched them. And then, of course, you then follow that up with all of the usual sort of false debate. You know, is it okay to help kids be themselves, or should we? We don't really understand gender, so therefore we know what your gender is, and you can't assert it yourself. It's all that usual nonsense.
Well, it's always written by cisgender people about trans people, isn't it? And they can't conceive that trans kids can actually know what gender they are. Therefore, they just don't get it. They can't possibly know what they're doing for the rest of their lives, like all the other kids can. And it's just ignorance.
Yeah, I was reading one of a sort of transcript of one of these debates afterwards on something like Today or Newsnight or something of that ilk, and yeah, I think at some point somebody said, "Well, we don't really understand gender." Okay, I'm not sure we can define that, but yes, I'll go with that. We don't necessarily understand it, and therefore, because we can't really define gender and understand it, you're not allowed to self-define, and it's not in a legal sense. This is just in the sense of a kid saying, I am, the gender that they are. You don't fully understand gender, how it works. Therefore, you're a boy. Like, how does that logical hop even work? That's just such a leap.
So I think there's this attitude that our gender identities and in the past sexual orientations, and some places people still believe this, are highly easily manipulated, particularly in children. So if they hear about gay people, they'll turn gay. If they hear about trans people, they'll turn trans, and that we have some terrible agenda that we're out to bolster our numbers like a cult and turn kids trans. And it's like,
which was a whole Section 28, of course, wasn't it? The whole promotion of.
Oh, yes, it was. But of course, that's nonsense. It's like charities like Mermaids exist as support agencies. So these kids are approaching their parents, which takes an awful lot of courage to do so. To say, well, no, I'm different. I don't identify with how everyone sees me as. I see myself in this way. And those parents, like some, just, oh my goodness, I have no idea, and then they don't know how to react. Some react negatively and say, right, I'm going to try and encourage my child by whatever means to not be trans, and others look for support. And Mermaids is one of those arms they can reach for that help. It's certainly not some badly run cult that's out to with some nefarious plot.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I mean, obviously the rhetoric from the Mail and so on is predictably depressing. However, I've been quite heartened by the general reaction outside of that. You know, it seems like when you look at it, I know people say never look at the comments, but I usually do in these situations, and it seems like the general trend is improving. You know, I think an awful lot of people actually are beginning to be quite supportive of the idea that people are trans, and that, you know, and that they know from a young age, and that it's separate from sexuality and all this stuff that we know. But I think the message is getting through, and I think it does feel like every time one of these stories hits the media, a negative one, it feels like every time the reaction is a little bit more, oh, it's not the 1970s anymore, don't be so ridiculous, kind of thing. It just feels iteratively improving every time. I don't know if anyone else feels that.
I think to a certain extent, yes. And when I've spoken to some people about the whole sort of false debate problem and all that kind of stuff, I think there is still a tendency to use use debate, as we know, and to sort of go for clickbaity headlines. There was what was that? There was a Transgender Love, wasn't it, on BBC Scotland a couple of weeks ago, and one of the headlines I saw being used on one of the sort of items of video content was something like, "Is it possible for a trans and a cis person to find love together?" Well, of course it's possible, but they choose to phrase it in this very transphobic way. But the positive spin on that is that when I actually, discuss that with friends and so forth, and not just trans friends, then people do get it, and you sort of point out that this is not okay, and I don't think it's just me. It's just no one seems. Yeah, everyone seems to accept that that actually it is okay to. The way things are being handled is wrong, and the world should be changing. So I think those bad attitudes are coming from a willful position, which is probably a very small willful position, as opposed to a large background of society pushing against it. I'm not sure that is there.
Yeah, I think that's well put. I think it's that loud minority, isn't it? There's a loud minority of people that think that trans people aren't real, we're a problem, we're making it up somehow. There's a massive group of people that are like, I don't really think that, they don't care either way. They just think that people are okay. And then there's this group of us at the other end that are like, we are real, and it's not just us, but we're real, and this is fine. And gradually, the whole thing shifts that way a little bit over time, and you get more people that are positively affirming that we're fine. Probably the same amount of people in the middle are like, and then this squeezed bit at the end. And hopefully, and you see in the comments just now, I'm saying we're going through movement like the gay movement or whatever in the 80s. And I guess it is like that. Even now we're still at this stage where there are people that think that being gay is wrong, but they're in such a small minority. And the concept of being gay is understood now. The average person in the street can project their own thoughts and emotions onto that concept and understand where that's coming from. And people can't do that with trans people yet, but I think they're getting there. And I think part of the problem, the part of the problem is that we don't have as consistent and simple a message as the sort of pro-gay movement had, because it's harder for people to understand. The vast majority of people experience sexual attraction, experience romantic attraction, so people can understand that. Whereas I don't like this whole comparing LGB and trans stuff, but inevitably we have to do it. But for us, of course, most people don't really experience their gender identity because it just is, because they've never had a problem.
Yeah, a lot of the problem, of course, is just it's a numbers problem in a sense, because the vast majority of people aren't trans and therefore have problems understanding it. But they do understand it a lot better if they actually meet and talk to someone who is trans. The trouble is there aren't that many of us. I mean, I'm sure there's more than we give ourselves credit for, but yeah, there'd be an awful lot of people out there, cis people, who just don't know any trans people and probably couldn't name one if you asked. Whereas they probably can do that with gay people, especially gay men.
Yeah, and I think I was avoiding this subject, but I can't help but bring it up now. Part of this is our own community's fault because we aspire to disappear. You know, we go through this, we have to come out, we have to transition, and particularly historically, actually, people have been encouraged to and almost made to in order to access treatment. But you have to get to where everyone is encouraged to transition and then just disappear and go back to whatever it is they do. And that's fine, you know, I don't want to besmirch that, but it does mean that we have to go through this cyclical cycle of activism every day. We have to rehash the same issues. You know, someone does great work with advocacy and gets laws changed and blah 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 and so on and so on, and then they disappear because they go stealth, and then somebody else comes along, and the laws aren't being applied properly, and someone has to go through all that activism again to get that stuff changed again, and then they disappear and the same thing happens. So to use my example that I know a lot about is, of course, in football and trying to get access to sports sorted out, is that someone will do something. There was a trans woman a few years ago who badgered the FA loads and loads to get an improvement to the rules around who could play. Great, worked, got some stuff changed, but she then disappeared, went stealth. So then when more of us, and there's been people playing the whole time, and then more of us have come along later on and wanted to play, and this person's not accessible anymore. Nobody knows who she is, so we can't go to her and find out who she spoke to, what contact, what agreements were made, because they're not being adhered to, and we've got to go around the whole loop again because everybody disappeared. And this keeps happening.
And how do you see it changing if so?
Sorry, say again?
Do you see that changing, and if so, how? I completely agree that phenomenon exists. So what could possibly do to happen to make that change?
I think there's two key things, and Charlotte and Lisa, keen to get your opinion on this, but I think there's two key things that might make this different. One is that now it is easier to be visible. We do have enough legal protections that you don't have to go stealth in order for self-preservation. You don't have to do that anymore. I've heard people say that you need to do that in the UK. I'm going to be controversial and say I don't think it's true. I think there are situations where, like, it's more comfortable to be stealth, but I don't think, like, we are really lucky in the UK. Very, very few countries that this is true, but it is not a necessity to go stealth.
Yes,
so because it's not a necessity,
to not do so. Yeah.
Because it's not a necessity anymore, it's possible to be out and to even if you don't continue, it's not for lots of people that don't continue to be visible, you don't have to hide. So to use the example I just did, where someone's done some great work and then decided to retire or whatever, you don't have to completely hide. You could still be available to help the next people that come along or whatever. Also, to people's point, a lot of people are transphobic because they don't know someone who's trans. Well, they often do, but they don't realise. And now perhaps they might realise because the person isn't hiding anymore.
There is discrimination out there. I get what you're saying. I think people at work know I'm trans, and I've had no bother at all. But there are places that do discriminate, and there are small, medium-sized towns where it can be much more pleasant if you do pass and can go stealth. But yeah, I think it's changing, especially in the cities, especially in the big companies. And I try and be visible, but sometimes when I'm on the bus late at night, I'd rather not be. Thank you very much. It's safer.
So just out of interest, what someone, you mentioned cities there, and that's a very useful point, because the attitudes within cities tend to be a lot more accepting, a lot more diversity. Generally speaking, it tends to have an easier time in larger cities than in, let's say, small rural villages, as a rule, I would suggest. I would also point out that of the people currently taking part in this live show, I think we mostly tend to live in fairly near big cities. So, as that particular aspect of our own diversity is not great. We tend to be mainly city people-ish. And so therefore I think we all have that kind of privilege of living in an area which is fairly accepting. For the people who live much further out away from the cities, in more in the rural communities, I suspect life is an awful lot harder. So at this point I'll insert a plea on Matthew's behalf for come forward and take part in nGendr, and we want to broaden our own diversity. End of sermon. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely would second that. We should always check our privilege, and I mean, just where I live, I think is it always gets described as being near to London, but it's not actually that near London, and actually culturally it's very different. And I think where I live is kind of one of these places where it's not rural, but it's beyond suburban. It is a town of 20,000 people or whatever, and it does feel very different to a city. And I do get, being quite obviously trans, I do get a lot more trouble here than I ever have in a city. But I've heard from people in rural areas that it's a very mixed bag, and sometimes actually it's much easier because it's kind of they don't know that trans people exist, and sometimes it's harder. So I guess it's hard to tell. I guess pull it back onto the subject of trans kids as well, which is where we kind of got to from this. Is that there's a couple of comments I wanted to touch on and get your thoughts on, which is around this thing that a lot of the narrative around trans kids is driven by this misunderstanding of what transition is, and this ludicrous sex changes for 6-year-olds type narrative that we always see, and we know it's nonsense. Right? To be clear to anyone who doesn't know, transition for kids means at most probably social transition, i.e. name change and presentation change, and that's it. They might get puberty blockers on the onset of puberty. That's it. To what extent do we think that's the core of the problem here? Is that mis-selling of what's actually happening?
Only partly, I think. There's still this big attitude that a kid isn't old enough to make this decision, whether or not they have any treatment, or it's like oh, the kid doesn't know if they want ice cream or jelly for tea, or they want Smarties, but they also want Rolos. They can't make the decision. So how can they make a decision as big as gender? And I think that's a big problem. And it's like that we're then imposing, saying, oh, they've expressed an interest, and that we're going, right, well, you played with a Barbie once, so you're now going to school in a dress. And it's just they're taking it to extremes. And the thing is, on a big decision like that, you're not doing it instantly. It's not the first time the child does it. It's usually repeated events. So the child is not making a frivolous decision, and a parent is not acting immediately. It's usually several years. But anyway, and then just an expression of playing with different toys or wearing different clothes doesn't make them trans. And we're not saying it makes them trans.
It's not.
But don't enforce this on them either.
It's not helped.
I've heard the phrase that by multiple parties, let the kids be kids. So exactly, let the kids be kids.
Well, that's the annoying thing is no one's asking these kids to make a decision. Right? It's not a decision that they make, oh, I'm going to be trans now. It's they just are, and they're just expressing it. And then as adults, we just have to support that. That's all we have to do. Yeah, it's infuriating. It's not helped by this constant stream of cis LGB or LG people mainly saying, "Oh yeah, you know, if I was a kid now, they'd have made me transition." I'm like,
No,
No, we wouldn't.
not unless you persistently said, "I am gender" for a period of time. Yeah. I mean, like our producer Luna has just pointed out in the chat, it's like we have to prevent the irreparable harm of the wrong puberty.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that for a moment.
Oh yes, need to make this point.
Yeah, quickly final points because we're running out of time.
There's a lot of people who make this point of it's based on this one poorly designed study that was carried out decades ago, that 80% of children will then change their mind and go into their assigned at birth gender, which is not true at all. So there's this worry of mind changing after the fact, and therefore these kids are going to be really unhappy in the future because they're now living in the wrong gender that was enforced upon them. But of course this is not true, and that I think you speak to the psychiatrists at like Tavistock, and then there's another one in Boston, US, and none have come across this desire to detransition. So there isn't this great number of regret stories at all. It's not true.
Yay for science.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, like the chat just saying, all we're doing is giving people puberty blockers to buy them time to, I guess, make an informed decision, or to sense check that they are doing the right thing, and that's all we want people to be able to do. You know, it's just supporting people. That's really all it is. So I'm conscious of time. We have about 5 minutes left. If anyone's got any any viewers have got any burning questions, burning topics they want us to talk about, get it in the chat very quickly. Does anyone on the broadcast have any other business that anyone wants to talk about? Excellent, we don't. So, final business then. So, next show, I think we should hopefully be doing one in 2 weeks. We will, of course, keep you informed on the Twitter, on the Facebook, on the other social medias that are available, the Instagram. We'll let you know on that. So I guess the next one will be what, the 7th of December, something like that. A couple of weeks anyway. So we'll get one in before Christmas, hopefully. Also, the standard call, Rachel touched on it earlier. If you want to help us out, if you want to do some content for nGendr, then please get in touch. We are particularly looking for people who aren't white trans women, basically. We've had a couple of contacts from a guy that was interested in doing something, which is great. We want more. We went a bit quiet for a little while. We were all quite busy, lots of stuff was going on. But we're kind of back now. We've just got some new articles coming up, so please go and read those. There's some excellent stuff on there that's been posted recently. We are looking for people to come on this show, so we're trying to rotate the cast a little bit and get different viewpoints. Particularly there's certain topics that we don't really feel we could talk about properly or do justice to because we don't have the right diversity on the broadcast. So that's really important to us. So yeah, get in touch with us. We're kind of back now. I think that's everything we had to discuss. I'm just looking at the chat now. There's a few interesting topics being brought up. We should mention. So Ashley was on the broadcast last time. The plebiscite that we talked about in Australia, that was defeated. So that's for same-sex marriage in Australia. That's been defeated. So that's not happening. I don't remember the time Ashley speculated that would happen, but that was as expected. So I guess that's not great news, but not unexpected. And yeah, so I think we'll probably leave it there. So I think, yeah, just please get in touch. To reiterate that, tweet us, email us, email nGendr@gmail.com, or tweet us at n_GENDR, or look us up on Facebook.
Different methods
Charlotte,
of contribution as well. It's like write articles, poetry, fiction stories, videos, photography. Someone asked if they could send an audio file. Absolutely. Any media you feel comfortable with. Yes,
absolutely, yeah. However you want to do it. So it's going to be bye from Charlotte.
Bye-bye.
Bye from Lisa.
Bye.
Bye from Rachel.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to producer Luna for helping us out and being involved with the chat and making this all happen. Goodbye from me. Thank you to everybody who's watched and participated. It's been really good. And see you in a couple of weeks. Goodbye.